And this is one of the reasons why it's so hard not to be a machista in Mexican culture, especially if you live in a small town, is because it's like a self-reinforcing cycle. Like every single man in that culture beats you into being like that. It takes a really strong personality to look at other men in the eyes and be able to tell them, you guys are full of shit and I'm not going to listen to you. So perfect example would be, again, this is small town in Mexico. The men are hanging out doing absolutely nothing because it's not the season when they're working in the fields, or right, they have some time. Maybe it's a Sunday. And let's say a guy comes in and joins the group. Like the first thing that they tell him, especially if it's a newlywed, is like, oh, ¿qué pasó, mandilo? ¿No te dejan salir? Right?
Yep.
And it's always that. It's like, so, ¿qué pasó, mandilo? No, que no va a salir, le pegan. They won't let him out. They'll hit him. And I never saw a guy walk up to them and say, yeah, that's who I am. So what? What's your problem? You have 2 kids on the side. Go take care of your 2 kids. Like, I never saw a comeback like that. I always saw people that
Would
would.
have been good.
I know that would have been a really good one. But I always saw men that either they started becoming more machista to fit in with that group, or they would stop hanging out with those guys.
And I remember earlier on when we got married, people were like, "Oh yeah, when are you gonna have kids? But also take your time and enjoy, because once you have kids, nothing's the same, right?" So they instill this fear of God for having a kid, and then you get to a point where, oh, they have kids, you don't have kids, and then people are like, "Oh, you're so lucky, you don't have to do this and that." And part of me is like, yeah, we're lucky because we still, we don't have disrupted sleep. We're not dealing with this stuff. But at the same time, we kind of want that, right? We kind of wish we had those problems that you're complaining about. Bienvenidos, damas y caballeros, aquí a la Perspectiva Café. Aquí estamos con nuestro amigo, compañero, el mero mero RO.
How's it going?
It's good. I decided to start the conversation in Spanish, but this is your brown perspective. Excited to be back here with you and hoping to tackle a number of issues from the past couple of weeks.
So much has happened after the election, especially with all the lawsuits and what's been going on. But I think before we get into the politics, we do want to talk about a slightly different topic today. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is. So we wanted to talk about Latino fatherhood. Part of the reason to have that conversation today is that our friend Herreo welcomed his second born into this world. So congratulations for the family addition.
Thank you. Although I must acknowledge that all the congratulations should be going to my wife because she did most of the work.
This is true. Big ups to Latino moms, because they're definitely not only do the work, but I think in so many ways shape who we are as individuals, our culture, and so much more. But I think part of it is a balance too. And I think so this actually gets us to the topic that I wanted to discuss, which is Latino parenthood. And part of it because obviously, again, the welcoming of Herreo's son, but also for sharing my perspective as somebody who has been trying to grow my family and I haven't been able to do so. So part of that is sort of, talking about a taboo subject, talk about some of the uncomfortable questions, uncomfortable reflections that I've gone through, and compare those to those of Herreos who obviously is in a different place. So I guess today I personally wanted to explore into those issues a bit and see where the conversation goes from there.
Yeah, and I do remember even before I got married and before we started having kids, I did get a lot of comments about that, and especially in the Latino culture. You'd have tias and tios and grandparents asking or kind of hinting that, hey, you're missing the bus here. You're going over the hill. What's going on? Where are the kids? And
well, you know why, right? Because it's in Latin America, we start so early.
Yeah, exactly. And at least you and I are from the same generation. And I actually started pretty late as well, into my 30s. And so you can just imagine I was getting all of those comments when I was in my late 20s, and I would just brush them off because most of our generation we are prolonging that even more and
Hmm.
more. So it's more normal these days. But it
Yeah.
still would make for some interesting conversations with the older generation when they would bring up those comments.
Yeah, yeah, and it's crazy because I know my mom, my grandmother, and there were so many young parents. Actually, my cousin who was, I think she must have been 18 when she um, was pregnant and had my first sort of second cousin. But for me, so much of it too just makes me think about the the roles and expectations around Latino culture and Latino fathers, and particularly, I know there's a lot of stereotypes, and some are based on truth, right? So the absent father or the one that has multiple kids from different family, from different girls, from different women, and obviously you have domestic violence and all these things. So there's a lot of those dynamics, perception of what a Latino parent is and isn't, or the fact that they're emotional, they're hardworking, but they cannot somehow express those sentiments with their kids or their partners. So it's an interesting how when you look at the different pictures or images that society has of Latino parents, it's an interesting mix to see, and also you kind of appreciate, okay, this is the kind of Latino parent that I didn't have, that I want to be, and what I'm striving to do.
And the one about the absentee fathers or Latinos having multiple families, that one is interesting because that in itself is such a taboo topic within
Yeah,
the families, within the culture. And even once it's known, once it's out in the open that hey, your dad was messing around 20 or 15 years ago and he happens to have a kid that happens to be the same exact age as the firstborn with his wife. And once that comes out, it's like okay, it gets handled in whatever way it does, and then it doesn't get discussed again. And
yeah,
maybe to
or
some
it
extent,
doesn't get handled
yeah,
too.
yeah, or it doesn't get handled. Everything just gets suppressed, right? And so I think to some extent, Latinos have been successful in some way of suppressing that so that it doesn't bubble up to mainstream culture. Because when you hear these like typical stereotypes about Latino families being close knit and about the role of fathers and mothers and so forth, yeah, you don't hear about any of these things, but I can tell you personally that most of I mean, I can name so many different friends and cousins and other people in my community whose father has illegitimate kids, sometimes
Yeah,
more than one. I had a buddy in high school who he was always in a positive mood, very stoic. He never seemed to be down. Things didn't get to him. But then one day he came into school and he was quiet. He wasn't talking to anyone. So we knew right away that something was wrong with him. So we just kept asking him because you're in high school. You don't have any boundaries. You don't have any sense of respecting someone's privacy. So we just kept asking him, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? And he finally told us, well, I just found out this morning that I have three half brothers. All of us were like kind of shocked because that's the last thing that you would expect. And we asked him, how did you find out? He says, oh, they came to the house and they knocked and they introduced themselves.
escándalo,
Yeah.
escándalo, es un escándalo. Yeah, it's crazy. And I think for me too is wondering how much, I guess acknowledging how much religion, particularly the Catholic faith and their approach to one, contraception, and two, sort of the sanctity of marriage, and the fact that, in a culture where, you're supposed to live up to being this Christ-like father, that the fact that they don't believe in contraceptions, they also don't believe in divorce, kind of has created this situation where, okay, yes, I kind of have my quote unquote my legal, normal, good family, but then I also somehow are able to have multiple kids and not really worry about them, particularly as long as I have the financial means to take care of them. And obviously, all of that kind of is what makes Colombian culture, I would say specifically, very machista. It's almost like because of how constraining the marriage situation is going to be, it's like males kind of developed this system that, okay, as long as I'm a good father, as long as I keep it in the down low, I can have my other family, and as long as I'm taking care of my first family, and and part of it is, they're the ones in charge, so they're the ones that have a little more
Hmm.
authority, and they're in a position to live that way and be accepted by their, for the most part, by their families and society at large.
But let's get one thing straight regarding men, though. They would
Uh-huh.
act that way whether or not there were
This is
some
true.
religious barriers. What you're saying is that they found some justification so that they could work within the restrictions of the Catholic Church. And within those restrictions, the way that they've been able to justify it is to say, well, my role as a man is to be the provider and to be here for my family. And as long as I'm doing those things, then it's still okay for me to do these things on the side as long as I can keep them under wraps and it doesn't become a huge scandal.
Or they're accepted by society, right? You think of Thomas Jefferson and and his slaves. It was known that they had kids, and that that he was his moza. But so that same dynamic happened in Latin America too. But I guess the other, it's funny because as you were saying that, it reminded me of the reason why there was a breakup in between the English church and the Catholic Church, right? The
Yeah.
king wanted to marry it again, and the church didn't allow it, so he started his own church.
It's too restrictive for him. So,
But I guess for me, part of it was, as someone who has tried to have kids, doing the artificial
yeah.
insemination, doing in vitro, and
Yeah.
going to all those things. As a guy, I started thinking, why do I want to be a father, right? And is it that I want to be a father because I want to be a father to my kid in the way that my father wasn't there? In some ways, kind of like have this desire, this ideal that I want to be the best father ever. Or is it just because of society? It puts that expectation on you and your partner to have a family, to procrear, como
Hmm.
dice la Biblia. So I guess part of my process too, and realizing that I can become a fire, right? A father. There are ways that I can, through adoption, to surrogacy, to all these options. But I guess getting the fundamental question of why do I want to be a father, and is it something that I really want to do, or is it something that's being exposed from the outside, and is it worth pursuing that by all means necessary?
And do you know if you have arrived at an answer or getting close to answer that? Because that does sound like it's a tricky question to ask yourself.
Hmm.
Where does your own agency end, and now it's just what society is expecting of you
Hmm.
versus what it is that you want. But you can even ask the question, well, how do you know that what you want is not just based on some subliminal things that you've picked up from your community, from society,
Hmm.
right?
Exactly.
So how do you, where are you at right now in terms of that process?
Well, I think I was there. I definitely started there. I think part of the reason I want to have a kid is because that's what is expected of me. I want to give my mom the opportunity to be a grandma and do, what grandmas do. So I think before that, it was very much in that initial expectations, but then realizing that, what, like, it is there is agency, right? And in some ways we do have the option to say, what, we tried, but we're not going to be parents, so now we can just decide to do selfishly with our lives. But at the same time, you realize that there's a mix of things, because there's the traditional things that you do have with a family, and that you part of it are so much ingrained in the media and society and culture that, oh yeah, you want to have that experience of waking up late or not sleeping and changing shit and doing all these things. And then the other part of you is like, yeah, I don't need to really go through that to know that it's tough and it's necessary. But then
Hmm.
do I want to go through that? And then it's like, well, or do we adapt and get maybe somebody that's a little older? But obviously, then it becomes an issue that there's not that bond of having to deal with the shits and with the temper tantrums and all that stuff. So I guess understanding that in some ways we have some options, some choice into the type of, or I guess I have some choice into the type of parenting I want to have, and then obviously then it's a negotiation with my partner or with my wife.
The late nights changing diapers and having to rock them to sleep, because I'm going through that right now with our second son, and to me it seems like he's a lot worse than the first one, or maybe I just forgot already
Perdiste
from,
la práctica.
yeah, I'm out of practice. But the reason why you want to have kids every 2 or 3 years apart is so that you don't fall out of practice, so that you still remember what it was like. But I just, either I forgot a lot of things, or this one is a lot worse, because we can't put this baby down even for 1 or 2 minutes after he feeds, because he starts crying. He wants to be rocked. He wants to walk.
Yeah.
And yeah,
He
look, I
wants to
don't
be
know.
held.
As you were saying earlier, that's something that you have a choice not to go through. And I was thinking, would parents willingly forego that with their kids? Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think any parent wants to go through that. It's tough.
Yeah. Well,
The
that's the thing. That's a funny thing because, and I remember earlier on when we got married, people were like, "Oh yeah, when are you gonna have kids?" But also take your time and enjoy because once you have kids, nothing's the same, right? So they instill this fear of God for having a kid, and then you get to a point where they have kids, you don't have kids, and then people are like, "Oh, you're so lucky, you don't have to do this and that." And part of me is like, "Yeah, we're lucky because we still, we don't have disrupted sleep. We're not dealing with this stuff. But at the same time, we kind of want that, right? We kind of wish we had those problems that you're complaining about. And then obviously people see it as, oh, it must be nice. They can do whatever they want. They can travel. And I wish I was them.
Yeah, and this might just be me speaking from a place of of inexperience, because my oldest son is 2.5, and so now I have a
Yeah.
second one. And when I was reading about the process that a woman goes through when she gives birth, because it's such a painful process, but I
Mm.
think a mechanism kicks in where it's like it triggers some type of amnesia, so that women are supposed to forget that, so that within a year or
Mm.
two they forget just how bad it was, so that
And
it,
they want to do it again.
yeah, so it allows them to be willing to have another kid. And I'm not, at least I've read that somewhere. And
Hmm.
now that I'm thinking about the experiences of having to walk back and forth to rock my son to sleep, I think like the next day he must be emitting some in
Hormones.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
in his odor, so that when I smell it, I forget stuff the next day. Because just yesterday or 2 days ago, I was literally walking back and forth for like 45 minutes to an hour, trying to at least just get him to stay quiet, to fall
Yeah.
asleep, to not cry, so that his mom could rest, because he has
Yeah.
not been allowing her to sleep at all. And it's really, it sucks. I think I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty patient, or if you're not, it teaches you patience. But then the next day I forget all that stuff, and then they give you a little smile, and it's like the best thing in the world, and you
Yeah.
forget all of that bad stuff. So in a way, look, you can't have the good without the bad. Sometimes some of these challenges that you go through, they may seem hard, but it's really, all you're really, look, if your son is healthy, all you're really looking at with a new baby is you're losing a lot of sleep. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's bad, but it's not the end of the world. And I, maybe that's part of my process of coping with it. It's part of my coping mechanism, that I say, look, there's so many kids that are born with problems, and then the parents have to go not only through everything I'm going through, but also deal with the medical issues that are
Yeah.
associated with whatever condition the son or daughter is born with. So I don't have to go through any of that. I just have to walk back and forth so that my kid can not
Yeah.
cry for a full hour so that he can give my wife a rest. And yeah, it's been a lot of sleepless nights for me, especially for my wife, even worse because she's the one that's breastfeeding, and it's painful,
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable. So it's just you kind of just go through it, and yeah, it has its sucky parts, but then it also has its nice rewards.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because you and some of the close male friends that I have who have gone or are going through the parenting experience, you guys are showcasing the modern Latino father experience. So going back to some of the stereotypes and things that we're discussing, I think that what warms my heart is to see Latino males redefining what it means to be a Latino father, and in terms of somebody who is not afraid to get their hands dirty with the baby stuff, right? With the cooking, with the cleaning, doing all these things. So just showing how, particularly in modern times, having a kid takes two parents and takes two families. Well, it takes, the parents, and then oftentimes if you're lucky enough to live close to your abuela or tíos or tías, the whole saying about, it takes a village comes true. But I think more importantly, highlighting how a lot of Latino fathers now are definitely changing based on the lessons that they learned as kids to have, I think, a healthier understanding what it means to be a man, what it means to be a father, what it means to be a parent in the modern context.
It didn't seem like it was that difficult to step into that role because I think even when I was younger, I always questioned the formalities and the specific structure that was in place in my family, in my town. I never understood so many things. Like, they didn't make sense to me. I thought they were stupid. Like, not talking during dinner with your grandparents. Like, what the fuck not? Like, why can't we
Then
talk
what are you
during
supposed
dinner?
to be doing?
Right. Like, okay, let's talk. We're eating. Maybe they just didn't want the kids to talk. Maybe that was the
Yeah.
case, right? But what was the other thing? Like the roles that they put on women. Even as a young kid, I never really understood. Like, I grew up in a small town in Mexico, and I would always think, why is it that the men get to hang around on the corner and just lounge and loiter and chill and drink and chat, but not the women? Like, the women can't do that. If the woman were to do that, the men would get offended by that. They would get
Yeah.
overprotective of their woman. And then they would start accusing them of like, oh, why are you outside? Are you trying to attract attention? Like, andas de coqueta, or what's going on? And I always thought that stuff was like stupid. I never really thought that was like a healthy way to run anything. And so me, when I grew up, and it's like, okay, I know I know exactly what it is that I don't want to do, and I don't want to do any of that nonsense that they used to do in my town. Even like as a man, especially in Mexican culture, and this is one of the reasons why it's so hard not to be a machista in Mexican culture, especially if you live in a small town, is because it's like a self-reinforcing cycle. Like, every single man in that culture beats you into being like that. It takes a really strong personality to look at other men in the eyes and be able to tell them, you guys are full of shit and I'm not going to listen to you. So perfect example would be, again, this is small town in Mexico. The men are hanging out doing absolutely nothing because it's not the season when they're working in the fields, or right, they have some time. Maybe it's a Sunday. And let's say a guy comes in and joins the group. Like, the first thing that they tell him, especially if it's a newlywed, is like, oh, ¿qué pasó, Mandilo? ¿No te dejan salir? Right?
Yep.
And it's always that. It's like, so, ¿qué pasó, Mandilo? No, que no va a salir, le pegan. They won't let him out. They'll hit him. And I never saw a guy walk up to them and say, yeah, that's who I am. So what? What's your problem? You have two kids on the side. Go take care of your two kids. Like, I never saw a comeback like that. I always saw people that
Would have
would.
been good.
I know that would have been a really good one, but I always saw men that either they started becoming more machista to fit in with that group, or they would stop hanging out with those guys entirely. But the ones that would stop hanging out with them would be very few. Most of the pack, most of them would still, like 90 or 95% of them would still keep doing that same stuff. And then you saw a few outliers here and there that would just stop hanging out with them because of that. And so at least for me, it was easy to just get away from that type of mentality because it's such a drastic change coming from a small town and then being here in the U.S. Even though I'm close to my community from Mexico here in the U.S., because of the type of upbringing that I've had, the way that the culture has changed so much for our generation here in the U.S., it's so easy for me to like be that guy that goes to them, and if they tell me "¿Qué pasó, mandilón, te pegan" or something, I'd be able to just like, shut the fuck up, man. Like, what the fuck does that even mean, right? That's exactly what I would say to somebody in Spanish, obviously, and then I'd probably shame them.
Ya te americanizaste, RO.
Right, but
Ya no eres Latino.
it was not that, man. But I can imagine if I was living in Mexico and we were living there for 10 years and I would have to go through that every single day. I could see how that would be tiring. I don't think I would break and become like that. I'd probably be the guy that would just stop hanging out with those guys too.
Yeah, or find somebody who would be along the lines of your experience or your perspective in life. And chances are you would find them, right? Either at work, school, whatever your social network or circle was. And for me, it's interesting because I kind of had a very different experience. I grew up in an all-female household in part because, so I was sort of on the other end of of what happens when you have another household.
Mm-hmm.
So then I grew up with women. So I grew up with my great grandmother, my grandmother, my mom, and then my female cousin. So I was really the first guy in my immediate family. So from the get go, I experienced seeing strong women. My mom and my grandmother working really hard to provide for me. Same things for my other tias, well, tias, because at that time they were all tias. And then my great grandmother would take care of me. So part of my experience, is kind of very close to the feminine side. And I think some people credit that, or I sometimes credit that with my views about, being comfortable with strong, powerful women because, I wouldn't want my mom, my grandmother, my cousins, my sisters to be put down just because they were a woman, right? So realizing that they're so strong and powerful and capable. So for me, even though that wasn't something that I was critically thinking about, it did inform my perspective. My dad was in the picture. I grew up knowing him. Well, I also think the culture around it kind of always sends you those images of what the family is supposed to be and how things are supposed to work. But in any case, I think those were some of the reflections, memories that came up as you were describing sort of the stereotypical norms and how sometimes I think now I feel that we're in a place where there's more Latinos like you and I who are challenging and who are redefining what it means to be a Latino male.
Here in the U.S., I don't know how much that's changing in places like that small town that I come from in Mexico.
Yeah, and I think the biggest parts of Latin America, like in the Bogotas, and I think a lot of it is because women, you need to have a two-income household regardless of where you want to live, particularly in Latin America too. If you want to kind of progress, you need to be able to have two incomes and build whatever you can. And same thing here. Obviously, when it's just you on your own, is very tough to go ahead and make it happen. But I think that change is coming. But to your point, that yes, I'm sure there's little towns in Colombia and other places where that message hasn't reached yet.
Yeah, it's gradual, and I know in places like in Mexico, in the city, or in the cities in Mexico, it's a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
There's with the independence of women, as you said, the two-income household. There's those traditional roles get blurred more and more. I think we still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe true equality will happen when men no longer expect to be forgiven for their infidelity, while at the same time saying that they'd never forgive a woman for hers.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be equal.
Yep.
If because you know how the traditions Hispanic men or maybe all men in general, uh, the way that they view infidelity is, oh, I if I do it, you know, it's messed up and everything, but it's at this level. But if
Hmm.
my wife does it, oh, she better make sure that whatever, you know, it's like the offense is 10 times greater if the
Double
wife,
standard.
and that's the double standard that they right. It shouldn't be. It's the same thing. It's infidelity. It doesn't matter if the man or the woman does it. So we'll see. Eventually, we'll get there. The days of the Hispanics with the Hispanic men with side families may be coming to an end. So you know what their peak was, and the peak of that the ¿cómo se
What?
dice? What's the word? De ser descarados, just to
Uh-huh.
be shameless, would be, yeah,
Sinvergüenzas.
sinvergüenzas would be someone like, there's a woman from my town in Mexico whose husband cheated on her, and it he didn't even have the common courtesy to go and do it with a woman from another town or from far away. He did it with the neighbor. And not
Damn.
only that, he got her pregnant. So now he has his wife with the three kids that they have, and then gets the woman that lives in front pregnant. That, I think that's the height of the shamelessness that men hit. I think it's on the decline now. You know, I think
Yeah.
we're getting further and further away from that. But if I could point to the peak of what it is to have that type of double standard, I would point to a man doing something as outlandish as that and thinking that he can get away with it, or that somehow it's okay for him to do that.
I thought you were gonna give me a decade. I thought you were gonna say the 60s, the 70s, the 80s.
No, this happened like
And
15 years ago.
so reciente in los 2000s. Well,
Yeah.
I know we're coming towards the end of our time today on this conversation. Any closing remarks or thoughts about what we discussed?
Yeah, just two things. I want to make sure that here I am talking for 30 minutes about what it's like to be a father, and we're not giving a chance for my wife to share what it is from a woman's point of view, what it is that they go through. So I want to make sure that I do comment that in the future we do want to get that experience in here. We do want to
Hmm.
have the experience of a female, and in terms of motherhood, but I also want to say that I I want to acknowledge that it's like 100 times or 1,000 times more difficult for them. The other thing is that, as I mentioned before, just to reiterate, I am new to this game. I'm a rookie.
You're a
So,
rookie, man.
yeah, talk to me in 10 years and ask me how things are going with these kids.
Yeah, no, but I think thank you for making the point. I think yes, shout outs to all the moms for the incredible, amazing work that they do. And then I mean, when you think about it, and particularly as somebody who hasn't been blessed that way, the miracle of birth and how difficult and precious it is. And I know you made the comment earlier too that also like how focused you are on just being grateful for that baby being healthy, and also realizing there are families who have to deal with babies with complications and things like that, and you never want to be that family. And but you also know that those people love, and they're having a difficult time, but they're really caring for for someone who they love. And I think that's part of me, part of one of the reflections that I had is like, do we kind of go through this infer this fertilization process, and then what happens if the we have a baby who has issues. And I think that's one of the fears that you have when you go through that experience, but then acknowledging that as a legitimate fear, and acknowledging that as the same thing as with parenthood in general, you just adapt, right? You learn to cope with the situation that was handed to you. But thank you for pointing that out. I think about just our general appreciation, but also wanted to highlight that this is a space for us, two Latino men, from different experiences, but with some things that we want to say. So, again, this is not provide not to hide perspective, but just share our own as Latino Latino males. And I think, saying things that to ourselves and to others that often don't get said or don't get explored. So I know
Yeah,
that's part of the intent of this conversation.
yeah, there's a lot to discuss here, and I think we could have other discussions. And again, I would like to at some point bring also the female perspective on this.
Hmm.
Um, and as you were talking about the complications, it reminded me of this amazing podcast in Radiolab. So for people that are not familiar with Radiolab, it's a really good podcast. They cover a diverse range of issues, from the sciences to history to other areas. And so they did a podcast on specifically that, on
Hmm.
a woman that was having, she went through pregnancy. I think she was in her mid 40s, but she went through a difficult time just to get pregnant. And finally, when she did get pregnant, she had a lot of complications. And the episode is called
Hmm.
23 Weeks, 6 Days, because it talks specifically about that. 23 weeks, 6 days is the cutoff for when you could give birth to a premature baby,
Hmm.
and they still think that they can save the baby, that the baby has a
Hmm.
chance of living. Anything before that, and I think the percentage drops dramatically. And so it
Hmm.
talks specifically about that. And yeah, it's a really good podcast for people out there. If they're interested, they should listen to it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that resource.
Okay, entonces sí, we'll leave it at this for today. If you guys like what you're listening to, make sure to check us out. Follow us at Brown Perspective on YouTube. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. Nos vemos.
Ciao.